Okay. So one way to think about this, if you're inclined to think about history and politics, so you want to think about this is really a showdown about who is going to be the leader of the Jewish people. In other words, where does the monarchy come from? And if you want to go back for a second and ask the broader question of this conflict between the brothers and Joseph, and why the brothers reacted so terribly, where the brothers, the father was showing favoritism to Joseph, and the brothers decide to kill him. So why are they killing him? First, indirectly, well, first they try to kill him indirectly, and then they try to throw him in the pit and sell him as a slave. But the bottom line is, why are they trying to get rid of him? So there are all kinds of interpretations, as we spoke in the past couple of weeks. But one interpretation is Judah is the king. Judah is the leader. And Joseph would be a threat to the king. And we live in a democracy, so to us, this is not so common. But even in the Jewish law, someone who rebels against the king is liable for the death penalty. You don't mess with the king, right? Amora de Malchut, someone who rebels against the king is liable for the death penalty. So the brothers look at Joseph, and they say he's undermining the position of leadership of the king. He's going against the king. Judah's the king. Judah's descendants become King David, and all the kings of Judea, ultimately the Messiah, ultimately Mashiach. So you got to get rid of the guy. The guy is challenging the king. What is the reality? What is the reality? A very interesting reality. Reality is that if you look at the story of the kingship, of monarchy in Israel, which is complicated and not all pretty, not that pretty, but if you look at the story, there are pockets of positivity. But if you look at the story, you will see that always before there emerges a king from Judah, you have a king from Joseph. So, for example, the best example would be before King David, you have Shaul HaMelech, Saul the king. Shaul was from the tribe of Benjamin. Okay, so he's not Joseph, but he's from Joseph's brother. In other words, the children of Rachel, right? So you have the children of Rachel. First, you have the king Shaul, and only then, because he sinned, he didn't kill Amalek. It was taken away from him and then given to David, given to King David. But the reality is, the pattern is you can't ignore this. You cannot ignore this. Even when you look back at this biblical story, so you're looking at Benjamin. Oh, I said Benjamin. Welcome, Benjamin. I see you joined. Welcome, Benjamin. Looking at the biblical story. You look at Joseph, and Joseph in this week's parsha, he says something very interesting. He says, God sent me to Egypt. God sent me to give you sustenance. He sent me before you. Before you. One way to think about this, if you're looking from the historical perspective, Joseph is saying, of course, Judah is the king. But before there could be a Judah, there has to be a Joseph. In other words, when Joseph says, I'm the leader, he's not saying, I'm the leader, I'm the eternal leader. I'm going to be the dynasty of leadership, or the dynasty of monarchy will emerge from me. No, he's saying, my job is to prepare the way for Judah. And here you see the pattern emerging twice. You see that pattern emerging in the book of Genesis, where first Joseph is the king, and then he makes room for, ultimately, it's going to be Judah, as we'll read in the later books of the Bible. And then if you want to talk about when they had a monarchy within Israel, you have a similar pattern where first you have Shaul, who is the son of Benjamin, child of Rachel, so camp of Joseph. And only then do you have the concept of the king of Judah, which would be David, Solomon, and like I said, all the Judean kings, all the way down to the coming of Mashiach, which will also be from the house of David. So the point is, if you're looking from the historical perspective, this interaction and this transaction between Judah and Joseph and the balance of power is not something just between two brothers, but this is general concepts in the energy of who is the leader and who needs who. And there's this tension because Judah is the ultimate leader, but before Judah could become the leader, you need Joseph sort of to pave the way. So that is, if you want to look at the parsha from the historic perspective. We're going to try to look at it from the Kabbalistic perspective as well. But a lot of these concepts overlap. Go ahead, Dr. Bob, please.
Just a moment on the word Vayigash. I mean, doesn't it? I know that this has been a subject of the rabbis discussing why it wasn't he came, he entered, but Vayigash almost implies almost like a gladiator scene where two equals are kind of approaching each other and sniffing each other out. Is there any truth to that?
So the Medrash goes wild with that. The Medrash has this whole backstory where Joseph, when you read the story, when you read the actual story when you read the actual story of the narrative, the way it's written in the Torah, you see the balance of power pretty clear. You see that Joseph has all the power, and Judah is in the position, he's not in a position to assert any power. All he's doing is requesting. The rabbis, especially in the Medrash, say no. That's a superficial reading. Yes, he's the king, but the balance of power is different, and they want to read that yes, Judah spoke words, softer words, but the tone was not soft at all. And the way where you see it alluded to in the actual verse is because what in the introduction he says, may my words enter your ears, and let not your wrath flare up against your servant. Okay, so why does he have to say, let not your wrath flare up, if he's speaking so gently and with so much, what's the word I'm looking for? Tachanunim. He's just in a state of asking and submitting to Joseph's power. Then why does he have to say, let your wrath flare up? So the rabbis read that to mean that his tone was not going to be a soft one. It was an accusing one. Everything he says there, he says, how could you do this? How, he retells the history of their interaction, and he's speaking with a very harsh tone. And that's where the rabbis want to see that, yes, on the surface, you have the king and you have this Hebrew, and it looks like the king has all the power and the Hebrew is powerless. But if you look a little deeper, it's not so simple. The balance of power is going to shift. And if you say truly in the family, the balance of power, in some ways, Joseph was the leader, in some ways, Judah was the leader. And what we're going to try to do in the Kabbalistic angle is think about what does Judah represents, what does Joseph represent, and these models apply in our relationship to God. It applies to our relationship to other people, and in general questions of hierarchy. And the question is, what is on top, what is on bottom, what's higher, what's lower, Judah model or Joseph model? And the answer is going to be, obviously, you know that, Bob, is it depends. Depends on what era in history. Sometimes Joseph is the leader, sometimes Judah is the leader. Sometimes, and throughout history, you'll see. So once we get to the Kabbalistic model, we're going to see this in a way paradox, because on one hand, there is a hierarchy. On the one hand, we break the hierarchy, and which one is right? They're both right. So that's what we're going to try to do, hopefully, in the next couple of minutes. Go ahead, Vicky, please.
Thank you, Rabbi. I had a problem with this interpretation that you mentioned earlier, that if there is a threat to the potential king, you can kill the contender. So to take
the kings like that rule. I'm sure you don't like it, but the kings like it. Go ahead. I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
But is there any literature, anything to support that troubling point? Because there is no justification to that, to taking matter in your own hands.
No, the king represents the executive branch of government. We understand that no matter what system of government you have, taking the law, if a person is sort of trying to break the system is going to be threatened. And you can't have a system where every day someone says, I don't like the king, I'm going to rebel, right? Sometimes you need to rebel, but make sure you have enough people to fight the king, and then the king can kill you. But in other words, in any system, you have to play by the rules. And if it's a monarchy, then you have to play by the rules. And if it's a democracy, you also have to play by the rules. So the point is, when we say you're guilty of death, means there's no room for you. There's no room for you in the system. So in other words, in Judaism, yes, we're very democratic. We have, to a degree, we have a separation of powers. We have a Sanhedrin. We have a Supreme Court. The king doesn't have all the power. The prophet can rebuke the king. And the Supreme Court doesn't have to agree with the king, and the king can't go to war without the Supreme Court. And there's many voices, and we encourage all the voices. But that's all playing within the rules, right? You have, in every country, you'll have a constitution, and it will divide the power between the different power. Defines the power of the different forms of government. And then you're playing by the rules. If you're going to willing to break the system, then the system can't protect you. So that's the idea. So the idea is, if you want to be part of our family, you got to play by the rules. And if Judah is the king for whatever reason, and you are questioning the authority of the king, then we got to get rid of you. So maybe killing is dramatic, but the point is, you're out of our life. You can't be part of the system if you're not accepting the axioms of the system.
But
That's sort of the idea.
I understand, but they are family still, and there is a father involved who is totally out of the picture in that decision.
Correct. I'm not justifying their position. I'm just saying that if you're looking for a legal justification, some people say, look, legally, if you're the king and someone rebels, that's what kings do. That's what you do. You kill the rebellion. That's what kings do. They have done it for a very long time. They still try to do it where they can, right? So the point is that in other words, all I'm trying to say, I'm not trying to get into that topic. I'm just trying to say that it wasn't a question of jealousy of who the father brought me a more expensive coat than he brought you. It was much more than that. It was the question of who's going to be the leader in the lifetime of the father and afterward and in the future. And I would say more dramatic. They believed that if Joseph becomes the defining character of the Jewish people would not survive. Right? So maybe now your father loves you. And that's why the coat didn't really get them so upset, even though the coat in all the pictures, the coat is the big deal, the colored tunic. That's not what happened. It's the dreams. And the reaction to the dreams where they say, HaMaloch timloch aleinu, do you want to be the king over us? Is that your ambition? Right? It's not about, oh, father bought you a nicer suit that he bought us. Okay, fine, but that's the jealousy. But that's not the threat. The threat is, you want to be our king? It's not just you, your philosophy, your model. With your model, we're not going to survive. So we got to get rid of you. We have to take matters into our own hands. Again, I'm not justifying. I'm just looking at it from what from one model of what this story represents, the model of leadership. And that model, the question is, who's the leader? And what's interesting is that Joseph always emerges first, and then Judah emerges. So the question is, who's the king? The king is both the king. So it depends. So that's the historic model. Now we want to talk about what is the Kabbalistic model. So I guess we'll put it out here. I'll put it out right here, and then if we have time, we'll read it inside in the English translation of the discourse of the Alter Rebbe. So the model is like this: Yosef literally means, the word Yosef means to add. In fact, when Rachel had a child, her first child, after years of being barren, she has a child, and she says Yosef. She's named him Yosef because she says Yosef Hashem li ben acher. I want God to. She asked that God should add an additional child, another child. Yosef represents increasing. Okay, so that's one model. What is Yehuda? Yehuda comes from the word to offer thanksgiving. Where does Yehuda get his name? Because Leah says Hapam Odet Hashem. When she has a third child, she says, fourth child. When she has a fourth child, she says, this time I'm going to thank Hashem. And she did this model. She understood there's going to be 12 tribes. And she felt like that the fourth child means that she's got a nice portion of the children, a nice chunk of the family. So it's fourth child says, now I'm going to thank God. Now, if you think about this for a second, in a way, the word thanksgiving, even before we get to the next step, which is related to Hebrew and Kabbalah, but even before that, the idea of adding and the idea of thanksgiving is two almost opposite points, right? When you say, I'm thankful, I am grateful, that's not the ambition that comes with the word for Yosef, right? Like, I think this kid needs therapy, Yosef. Imagine you say, why did your mother name you Yosef? Because the moment I was born, my mother said, I want another child. Another child already? What about me? I'm not good enough. I need a second one, right? So Yosef, in a way, is very ambitious on Rachel's part, right? She's not satisfied. And in a way, it's the greatest blessing of life is to be ambitious and to want more and to not be satisfied with what you have. But understand, all I'm trying to point out is that Yosef, the idea of I want more, and the idea of thanksgiving, which means I'm grateful, I'm happy, I'm thankful for what I have, it's almost opposite points. So that's step one. Now we're going to add layers. We're going to keep adding layers. They're not going to they're not, it's two different columns. In other words, we're adding layers in each of the columns. So what I'm going to say in a moment does not contradict what I'm saying earlier. I'm just saying there's sort of 2 points, 2 general ways of looking at life. So one is Yosef wants to increase, and one is being grateful. And I could talk about this for a second. I think that a lot of people are one or the other. People who are very, very ambitious often are not so happy. And people who are very happy often are not so ambitious. In fact, the happiest people on earth, if you look at the countries, are the people who have very little, right? And they're very happy with a little bit. So that's the paradox of ambition and success, is that success actually breeds more success, or this breeds desire for more success, and success does not always breed gratefulness. It's actually very difficult to be very successful and be very grateful, because like the Talmud says, someone who has 100, the natural instinct of a person, if you have 100, you want 200. If you have 200, you want not 300, but you want 400, right? So the appetite grows exponentially. That's just human nature. So the good life is someone who could be ambitious and grateful, but know how to use the two, right? When you're working, you're ambitious. When you come home for Shabbat, you have to turn off your ambition, and you have to turn on the gratitude and the celebration and living in the moment. And it's very hard to move between these two worlds because they're two models. It's the Judah model, it's the Joseph model. Go ahead, Dr. Baum, please.
Just not to be a gadfly, but pushing back a little bit.
Yes.
So much of what we discuss in this class is the lower world, the animal world, and the spiritual world, and a process. Are you seeming to suggest that the naming of a child like Menachem would suddenly predetermine your destiny? It almost goes in contradiction to what we learn in this class.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. The short answer is it's not on the names alone. If we have a few minutes, we could talk about the life stories, and I'm going to try to show it in the life stories. So if you give me, the short
Okay, I'll give you the chance, because it's not like Hashem. I understand Abraham, Hashem sort of did that, and the angel gave Yaakov Yisrael. But here are arbitrary names that are going on. You were, I don't know, number what of 10, and suddenly Menachem comes up. I don't know that determines your destiny.
It doesn't determine your destiny, but it's a factor. We believe that there's parents are given a Ruach HaKodesh, which is like a little bit of prophecy to give the name. So I'm not going to say it's the determining factor, but I'm saying it could be something. It could be something. And I just want to say something also, just this is because raising this as a general point. We have nature, we have nurture. You have this in the Torah as well. So if you look at the stories of Noach and in the beginning of Genesis, how the 10 generations and the story, there's a lot of strange stories happening at the end of the portion of Bereshit, and it's not clear what the Torah is trying to tell us. But the point is that some people read the stories is that the people had a pessimistic view of human nature. And every time something went wrong and someone killed someone by mistake, like the story of Lamech, who killed his grandfather, Cain, the justification is basically that's human nature. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to kill. That's who we are. We can't escape it. Can't escape the negative spiral. Then you have Noach. What happens to Noach? Noach is unbelievable. Noach's parents give him a name, and they say, you know what they say? Zeyinachamenu. This one will bring us comfort from the curse of the earth that was cursed in the days of Adam. In other words, it's an unbelievable thing. Even today it's radical. Then for sure it was radical. God cursed the earth because of the sin of the tree of knowledge. But they have a child who's a few days old, maybe 1 day old, maybe 8 days. There's no bris, so it wasn't 8 days old. But they have a little kid a little baby. You know how the babies are when they first emerge because you're the doctor. And they say this child is going to bring comfort because to the earth, and heal the curse that God cursed the earth. Okay, so this is a dramatic change from before. All of a sudden, they're very optimistic about this child's ability to bring positivity in the world. Lo and behold, that's what happens. The child brings comfort. The child is the one person who's not corrupted by his generation. So now you could sit here and say, was it prophecy or was it, this is what the child was taught? The child was taught by his parents. They told him, you have the power to bring comfort. And it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. All I'm trying to say is that the name is not the determining factor, but it could be an important factor. It means, what was the state of mind of your parents when they raised you? And I think that's not the determining factor, but it's important. And if you can also add to that the additional layers that we hope to add, you'll see how this plays out in Joseph's life. Joseph is constantly growing as a character. Joseph has character development. There's no personality in the Bible that I know of that you could see the development of his character, how he changes, how he matures, how he reaches greatness internally, not because of his external circumstances. In fact, the opposite. His character development is almost in the opposite trend as his external circumstances start getting worse and worse and worse, right? So Joseph is constantly growing. Okay, we'll get to Judah in a second. So it's in the name, but it's also in the it's also in the plot. It's also in his life experiences. Okay, go ahead, Dr. Tamron, please.
Rabbi, what you're talking about today, which is the seeming coexistence of opposites, which is on one hand, accepting things as they are, feeling grateful for who you are, feeling grateful for what you have, and yet wanting to go further to fulfill your potential and make a difference, is the essence of what they call dialectic behavior therapy.
Okay, elaborate, please. Give us
Sure.
give us
Basically, Marshall Linehan actually had a spiritual transformation, developed a therapy which is very, very popular now. In fact, it's probably it's probably past psychoanalysis in terms of the extent to which it's being practiced. And what it's based on is exactly what you're talking about, which is people accepting themselves as they are rather than feeling invalidated,
Right.
but then saying in what ways, which involves many of the skills that you taught in your relationship course, which is which in a sense predates dialectic, because I don't think anything in your behavior therapy, in your course on relationship, couldn't have been taught 500 years ago.
Right.
And so what I'm saying is that a lot of these contemporary therapies like CBT and DBT are all derivative of things that have been around in Kabbalah for 500 years. And yet what they call dialectic is exactly what you're talking about, which is
extremes, right?
acceptance, coexisting with
Yeah.
the desire to improve.
Yes.
Does that make sense, Rabbi? Am I clear? Or do I need
No.
to explicate further?
We need further elaboration, but not this moment, because we have a lot to do. But yes, we definitely have to come back to it.
Got it.
No, this living in extremes is a very important point in Judaism in general. We're not afraid of contradictions. On one hand, we say, be grateful. On the other hand, we say, more is demanded. And if you talk about in the Chabad culture, the Rebbe was very much into asking for more, and it was impossible to please him. Impossible. And in some ways, it's very frustrating, and in some ways, it's very empowering, right? But on one hand, you have to celebrate what you achieve, and going forward, you always have to be asking for more. So there's the ambition and there's the gratitude. Okay. Now I want to say one more thing about Judah, and then we'll get back to. But we're building another layer. In other words, so far, what do we have? Joseph. Joseph, the name means growth. And also the stories of his life is he's constantly growing. He's developing as a person, and he's also the desire to increase. Okay. Then you have Yehuda. We said Yehuda is the first thing is thanksgiving. Thanksgiving in a way means I'm grateful. In a way, it means that I'm not ambitious. It doesn't have to mean that. So I'm going to add more layers, more layers to this thesis. But at least in the beginning, at least in many times, gratitude and ambition don't always work together. Okay, but let's go to the Hebrew. In Hebrew, we talked about this in the past. In the Hebrew, the word hoda'ah, the word for being grateful, is the same for the word as submitting. In other words, if I submit that you're right, acknowledgement, I say, I acknowledge that you're right. Now, it's interesting. Acknowledge that you're right doesn't mean that I agree with you. It means that I agree that in this case, your perspective is right. It's not my perspective. You have this common in the Mishnah. In the Mishnah, you have the sages and you have Rabbi Meir. So it would say the sages agree with Rabbi Meir. In other words, they say your model works better in this scenario. Okay, so it's a very interesting thing. On one hand, I say, I have my perspective, I have your perspective. I'm not giving up my perspective, but I'm accepting your perspective. And in a way, that's related to Thanksgiving, because to be thankful, you have to see the other person's perspective. I can elaborate upon it, but I don't want to spend the time on it, but I'll give 20 seconds. What's the person who's ungrateful? We talked about this in the course. What do we call them? We call them minimizing, I think, diminishing and amplifying. If you do me a favor and I'm not a grateful person, what am I going to do? I'm going to diminish the favor. I'm going to say, okay, you did me a favor. It didn't cost you much. You wanted to do this anyway. So you took me out for dinner. You really wanted to go out to dinner yourself. You needed someone to laugh at your jokes, so you took me with you, right? So I'm diminishing what you did for me. If I'm an amplifier, I'm coming and saying, you know something? I appreciate your perspective, all the things, all the sacrifices you had to make to give me this. You could have gone somewhere else. You know, children say, my mother did all the complaints. My mother didn't do A, B, and C for me, but she did other things. Yeah, but that's her job. She's the mother. Okay, that's diminishing. But if you look and say, look from her perspective, and look at the sacrifices she made for me, then you're grateful. So you have to basically move out of your perspective and submit to the other perspective to truly be grateful. Now, let's add a layer. You talk about Yehuda. Joseph is the strive for personal growth and self-expression. That's all Joseph. I want to understand. I want to feel. I want to love. I want to feel connected. That's Joseph. Again, this model, what I'm going to say now, is going to work in the relationship between a person and God, but also in the relationship between human beings. The same thing. What is Judah? Judah is in the relationship with God or with another person, just as important as to find self-actualization, which is Joseph. You need Judah because Judah would be the idea of submission, acknowledging the other person is right, and being devoted to the other person, not because it's going to be an avenue for your own self-expression or your own self-actualization, but commitment to the other person. And that's Judah. And Judah, in a way, is related to action. And action means I'm going to do it, even though I don't feel that this is now very exciting. So in some ways, Joseph represents learning, feeling. These are things that grow over time. When you learn, you want to understand. It allows it expands you, either intellectually or emotionally. Both. That's all Joseph. That's growing. And then there's the idea of I'm in a relationship. In addition to finding self-actualization in this relationship, there is the idea of putting the other person first. I'm doing something for you, even though I don't necessarily enjoy it right now. That's submission. That's Judah. And it's true relationship with God, because you have studying Torah, loving God, which is all about self-actualization, but there's always the mitzvah. And the mitzvah is the action. And the action, it doesn't matter if you enjoy it or not. It's beside the point. The point of the mitzvah is not that you should enjoy it. It's nice if you could enjoy it. You're supposed to serve God with joy. But in a way, that's not the point. The point is to do the mitzvah. So your spouse tells you, take out the garbage. I'm not inspired to take out the garbage right now. It doesn't matter. That's not the point. The point is, if you're living here, you're going to submit. You're going to do certain things to show your commitment, even though right now you don't feel that this is leading to your self-actualization. Now, in a relationship with God or a relationship with the other person, you need both models. And the question is, which model is superior? And which model is going to help you survive? And that's really the Judah-Joseph question. Go ahead, Dr. Tamarin.
Rabbi, how can you say that Joseph didn't submit and put the needs first when he sacrificed his sexual desires to do the right thing?
Yes, so that's he certainly had the self-control, but self-control does not have to contradict self-actualization, right? Let's say a person is very committed to a relationship. In this case, it wasn't with the other woman, but it was his values and his morals. And he says, there's a temptation. This temptation is, on the short run, is going to seems pleasurable, but in the long run is going to destroy me. So now I have self-control. So that self-control could be a way of submission. It could be that. It could also be a way of reaching self-actualization, right? Anyone who ever actualized themselves, any successful person always had to say no many, many times. And the more successful you are, the more no's you have to say, Because if you're committing, if you want to go to medical school, right, there's a lot of things you have to say no to be able to go to medical school. First of all, you have to say no to law school. But you also have to say no to going out to party as much as you would want to, or going out to the beach as much as you, or going to read books, or going to do it. It's a very big commitment. And commitment is about saying no. But saying no does not have to be saying no in the service of something that I really want is not, I'm not saying there's no submission at all, but I'm just saying it still could be part of the overarching story of self-actualization. So yes, there are moments where you have to say, I don't feel inspired to go to medical school now, but I'm going to force myself to. And you have to do that too, because if you only go to school when you're inspired, or only go to work when you're inspired, you're probably going to get fired. Probably. Maybe some people could be inspired 100% of the time. I don't think so. So yes, even Joseph needs Judah. Even Joseph needs submission and commitment. But I'm saying, but the overarching story of this person's life is I want to grow and I want to learn. And to learn and to love, sometimes you have to say no to temptation and say, right now I'm not inspired, but I'm going to commit. And you're right. So Judah and Joseph, it's not two separate complete models. Everybody has both. Judah and Joseph themselves each had both. What's Judah's greatness, by the way? You want to look at Judah's greatness? Why he emerges to be the king? Why King David is the king, and why King David gets the monarchy, gets the dynasty, even though he also sinned. Whereas Saul, when Saul sins, Saul loses the dynasty. Okay? What's the number one factor in Judah's life that makes him the leader? His ability to take responsibility for a mistake. It's fascinating. It's not anything that he did. It's that when he sinned, he takes responsibility. He says, I'm wrong, she's right. He does it with Judah and Tamar. And that's a very important point. And here, he does it other places as well. And if you look at King David with King Saul, the problem with King Saul is when he sins, he doesn't listen to the prophet and he doesn't eradicate Amalek. He comes in because the prophet says, kill all the sheep, and he doesn't want to. So he says, we're not killing the sheep. He comes to Samuel, and Samuel's already upset because God already told Samuel that Saul didn't listen, and Saul's going to lose the kingdom and lose the dynasty. And Samuel's devastated because Samuel is the one who appointed Saul. And when Samuel shows up to meet Saul, the response of Shaul is unbelievable. It's unbelievable how he goes, he says, Hakimoti Edvar Hashem. I have fulfilled the word of God. Of course, he has not. But that's his attitude, right? King David, when he sins with Bathsheba, so Nathan, the prophet, shows up, spins a parable. Right away, King David says, I made a mistake. What's his greatness? Not that he achieved anything. He did achieve a lot of things, but that's not why he got the job. That's not why he got the dynasty. And Judah too, at the moment of truth, with Judah and Tamar, when they thought Tamar committed adultery, they wanted to kill her. And then he says, no, I'm the father. It's not adultery. She should be spared at the cost of his own reputation. Okay. So the moment of truth, he submits to the truth and he says, I am wrong. The other person is right. I made a mistake. This is not self-actualization. This is, in a way, submitting and it represents humility. And that's what Judah can do. And that commitment is what makes Judah, ultimately, what's going to make Judah the king. Now, going back to the model of within the service of God, you have study of Torah, you have love of God, all mitzvot, so creating an emotional connection to God. And then you have the model of the action, doing the right thing, eating the matzah on Passover. So if I ask you a question, if you have two Jews, one Jew loves the stories of the Passover Seder, loves to read all the Haggadahs, loves to say all the stories, but he doesn't like matzah. I don't blame him. Doesn't like matzah. Says, you know what? So I'm going to meditate, and I'm going to retell the story, and I'm going to reenact the entire story, which, by the way, is a very important mitzvah, to tell the story as if you were there. But I'm not going to eat the matzah. I'm going to meditate about the meaning of freedom, but I'm not going to eat the matzah. The other guy says, I don't have time for the Seder. I don't get along with my mother-in-law anyway. Who wants to go? I'd rather stay home. But you know what? I'm going to eat a piece of shmura matzah. No meditation, no spiritual experience. Which one is greater? So I think that most religions will tell you that the greater is the meditation. The greater is the experience. But Judaism unequivocally says the guy who ate the cracker, the guy who ate the matzah, did the mitzvah. Because Judaism puts an emphasis on the action. Why? For many reasons. But in this model, because the commitment, the fact of whether or not this expresses my self-actualization, the fact of whether I had a spiritual experience or a lightning experience is important, but it's not the most important thing. Because Judah Judah is, in a way, in the final analysis, Judah is the leader and not Joseph. Studying Torah is important. Creating an emotional bond with God is important, but the commitment expressed in action is more important. And both are important. It's a mitzvah to study Torah. That's what we're doing here. Otherwise, why are we doing here? We may as well go and, I don't know, drink hot cocoa. Oh, we could drink hot cocoa and study. Look at that. Okay. Otherwise, we do something else. So there is a mitzvah to self-actualize. We need Joseph. Nobody says we don't need Joseph. There are 12 tribes. Every tribe has a certain element that they bring to the table. The question is, what's the most important? Which one ultimately should be the leader? Which one is going to keep us as a people surviving for thousands of years? And I think if you look historically, it's the submission, it's the commitment. It's not necessarily the scholarship. You need scholarship, but you need commitment to the scholarship. Okay, so that's the overarching thesis. And I want to just talk a little bit more about Rabbi Shneur Zalman does in this discourse, which we're probably not going to read in time. When you look at the model of Joseph, there's hierarchy. And hierarchy, you have intelligence, you have emotion, and you have action. And that's a hierarchy in the world. And it's a true hierarchy. It's a hierarchy that you have in the Kabbalistic system. There's 3 worlds and 3 created worlds. There's Atzilut, which is the divine attributes, but the 3 created worlds is Bria. Bria is the world of intelligence, Yetzirah is the world of emotion, and Asiya is the world of action. And there are models, and that's the way it works. First, you develop your mind, then the mind creates passion in the heart, and the passion motivates action. And there is a hierarchy. And the person who's higher on the hierarchy is on a higher level. And if you want to become more spiritual, you have to go to the world of awareness, higher than the world of action. So the hierarchy is true. That's one model. And Rabbi Shneur Zalman says that if you look at the temple that the Jewish people built in the desert, it reflects that hierarchy, even in the architecture. How so? If you want to look at the temple, you had like this. You had the coverings were from animal skins. That represents the highest level. Then you have the walls, which were cedar wood, which represent the fact that there's vegetation, growth. That represents the second level. There's 3 levels of life. There is, taking the human out, there's the animal. Lower than the animal is the vegetation. Lower than that is the inanimate. Water, stones, minerals, right? So you got 3. And if you look at the temple, which temple is the structure, the home that we're making for God, you see a hierarchy. The floor is earth. On top of the earth, you have cedar wood. On top of the cedar wood, you have animal skin. That represents the hierarchy of the spiritual worlds. And in the spiritual worlds, yes, there is a hierarchy. And intelligence is higher than emotion because emotion is subjective. So if it's subjective, you're not going to get to the ultimate truth. And action is the lowest because action, what's action? It's dead. There's no awareness. There's no excitement. So there is a hierarchy. However, when the Jewish people come to Israel, 400 years after they had first made the tabernacle, the portable temple in the desert, they built a temple. What happens in this temple? No animal skin, no cedar, no wood. Not allowed to make it wood. It's all stone. It's all inanimate. What happened here? Why the change? It's interesting. When you come to Israel, so it's a much larger temple in Jerusalem. It's much larger than the temple in the desert. But the proportions are the same, right? So we keep the proportions because we're trying to recreate a larger model of the temple that Moses built in the desert with the exact and precise instructions from Hashem. So the proportions are the same, even though it's much larger. So if the proportions are the same, why does the material change? Why do we get to all inanimate? Inanimate means there's no life. Seems like there's no life. It's dead. There's no understanding. There's no feeling. It's just dry emotion. And the answer is, because from the perspective of the Kabbalah, ultimately, the ultimate bond could be created with the submission, which is action. It's true with the relationship with God, also to other people, right? So I'm in a relationship with you, and I love spending time with you. And that creates a very important bond between us because I enjoy it intellectually. My relationship is intentionally stimulating, intellectually stimulating, and emotionally stimulating, and everything is fine. But perhaps the deepest connection we get is when I do action for you in specifically the moments where I don't feel inspired. And I know it's not about me and it's about you. And even though those are not the most important, to me, they're not the most romantic parts of the relationship. And that may not be the parts that I'm going to write about in my diary. But deep down, those are the moments that actually solidify the relationship in a much deeper way. So ultimately, from the Kabbalistic perspective, because we have to have things both ways, there is a hierarchy, but ultimately, what is lowest on the hierarchy, which is action, Kabbalah will always say there's a hierarchy, and the lowest is rooted in the highest. So in other words, there is a hierarchy, action is the lowest, but the source of action has a power that those steps higher than the hierarchy don't have. So who has a greater connection to God? The scholar who spends his entire life studying Torah and who loves God, or the Jew that you stop on the street and say, do me a favor, put on tefillin, light a Shabbos candle, they do the mitzvah, they have no idea what they're doing. Who's closer to God? So in the Joseph model, there's a hierarchy. And if you can understand that, you feel you're above the one who just does the action. And that hierarchy is true. We're not breaking the hierarchy. Scholarship is important. But what we're saying, there's another track. On a deeper track, the person who does the action, in fact, is reaching a much deeper place within God and reaching the essence and reaching the core. And that's why in the temple in Jerusalem, which represents the ultimate connection with God, we're not going to make a temple that represents the hierarchy of knowledge, emotion, action, but it's all about inanimate. It's all about action, because action is inanimate in relation to the emotion and the intelligence. So that is the thesis about Judah and Joseph coming together. It's about our own life, action, a self-actualization versus commitment. We need this in our relationship with God. We need this in our relationship with other people. It helps us understand many things. This is a very important Kabbalistic model because it's really two models, and they both could be true simultaneously. So there is a hierarchy, but there's a busting of the hierarchy in the sense that what is the lowest is rooted in the highest. And we actually alluded to it in the Lechadodi, in the prayer that we say Friday night, Sof Maasev Machshavat Tchila. The end of the action emerges first in thought. So in the other formulations, Na'ut Tchilatan V'Sofan, the beginning and the end. The beginning is etched in the end, and the end is in the beginning. So the lowest is rooted in the highest, but there is still low and high. So we're having it both ways, right? So in the modern world, you would want to say equality. Everyone's the same. We don't like hierarchy. The Jewish position is it's more complex. There is hierarchy in some sense, but don't get too stuck in the hierarchy, because in more important senses, the hierarchy is broken because the lowest is actually deeper than the highest. In other words, on the rungs, the action is actually superior to the thought. So on one hand, we have a hierarchy. On one hand, the lowest is rooted in the highest, and we bust the hierarchy. But it doesn't mean we don't like any hierarchies, because then there's no scholarship, there's no growth. You need Yosef. You need to grow, right? So we have the model of the hierarchy. We also bust the hierarchy, and we do them both together, and we're not afraid to do both these contradictions. So this is just a taste, an introduction to the discourse. Maybe we'll do the discourse next year. We'll see what happens. Go ahead, Vicky, please.
Thank you, Rabbi. The importance of action and the high on hierarchy, I understand, but the priority is still, especially how the kings emerge. The priority is Yosef comes first, so the self-actualization.
Yeah. So let me address that in a second. Let me address that for a second. So let's say you want to create a relationship. The first step is not commitment. If you're going to date and you're going to date somebody and say, I want to marry someone, I want to date to marry. And I want, in this date, I just want to be committed to you unconditionally. That's not right, because then that's not the person you're supposed to marry. You first create a conditional relationship. You say, I love spending time with you. That's why I want to spend time. That's why I want to spend the rest of my life with you. So you start with Yosef. But if you stuck with Yosef, you're not going to survive 2,000 years or 3,000 years. You're not going to reach the deepest connection, because it's limited by the shortcomings of intelligence and the shortcomings of emotion, which is that ultimately it's not a good foundation. It's a good beginning, but it's not a good foundation. In other words, think of it as a tree. You plant the relationship has to take root, and the more time that passes, the more action, the more commitment, the deeper the roots grow. So you're starting with Joseph, but if you remain with Joseph, and if Joseph is the primary reason why I'm here, then you may run into trouble. If you start with Joseph and you emerge into Judah, which is what's going to happen eventually. In other words, what happens in Jewish history, and it's going to happen in the end of days. End of days, we'll see the superiority of action. We'll see the source of Malchut. There's all kinds of references in the Kabbalah where remember, the hierarchy, it's all over the place. Hierarchy of spiritual and physical. What's higher? So we said there's a hierarchy. Spiritual is higher than physical. On the other hand, we say the ultimate is the physical. So we're having it both ways. So you start with the spiritual, and only once you have a spiritual experience, then you can be enlightened enough to see the source of the physical and see the beauty of the physical. But if you went straight to the physical, you just become materialistic, right? So you have to start with the spiritual, which is Joseph, and then you go to the physical, which is action, and then the Joseph helps you understand the Judah, right? So if you have just commitment and no self-actualization in a relationship, you're only giving and you're not getting, then I'm not even sure it's a healthy Judah, right? So you have to have a little bit of both. The question is, what's I don't want to say what's dominant, what's the leader? Yeah. So there's a lot to think about. But I'm saying this is a model. It's not just an interpretation of Judah and Joseph. This is a very general model about how the Kabbalah sees the world as a whole, because the Kabbalah is very interested in mapping out the hierarchy of the spiritual worlds, but it's also, at least in the Chabad theology, very happy to bust the hierarchy and say what is lowest. The lowest realm is where it's all at, and the lowest realm is the physical world. And that's why while many religions and many Kabbalists are trying to seek transcendence and trying to escape the physical, at least the Chabad Kabbalah is saying the essence is in the physical. That relates to the Song of Songs, because we spoke about that as well many times in the Song of Songs, but that's already another story. We have to buy the book. Okay. Go ahead, Dr. Bob, please.
I guess we're getting very used to having it both ways. As I often say, in a true-false question, is it true or false? And your answer is yes. But
Yes.
there is a fallacy in this, in that, you know, so much of life is choice, is freedom of choice, is to
Yes.
go left or right. I mean, you can't be an elite athlete, do all your training, and then come home and have a box of Twinkies every day. You can't have it both ways.
Right.
So in some respects, again, not to push back, but to question, isn't there a fallacy in always having it both ways? I mean, if you are trying to choose between a hierarchy of self-actualization versus action, at some point you're going to have to make a choice in order to grow.
The answer is that there's a little bit of both. I'm not going to back down. I'm just going to try to find a metaphor, okay? And maybe the metaphor will help. I hate to get personal. Are you a better doctor on the day that you really want to go to work? Or are you a better doctor on the day that you don't want to go to work? And
Well,
I don't know you, and I don't know the medical field, but I would say both. There's an advantage to both.
mhm. Well,
So-
I mean, I would certainly say the days that I want to be a good doctor, I'm probably a better doctor. I mean, I think
I would say that at least at least in a spiritual mystical sense, if I go to work and I don't want to be here, but I'm here for you, in a spiritual sense, there's something to be said for that. I could write an essay about that, about how that's the most beautiful, beautiful expression of Dr. Bob. I could write a poem about that, I'm sure. Vicky could help me, right? So in other words,
Vicky could write a song.
and John
Yeah.
could psychoanalyze.
Yeah. The point here is we're saying there is an advantage to self-actualization. There's an advantage to submission and commitment. You're going to have both throughout your life. You need both. When you celebrate one, don't detract from the other. Hierarchy is important. Emotion is important. Desire, wanting to be there, self-actualization, enjoying what you do is important. There's also an idea of commitment, and it's not about me. That's also important. That's a busting of the hierarchy. Don't allow the busting of the hierarchy to take away the quality of the hierarchy. Or speak in different terms. What's more important, to eat the matzah or to learn about the Passover Seder? Now, I spend my time teaching Torah. I'm going to say learning about the Seder is very, very important because there's a hierarchy. And you have two people at the Seder. One guy is just engaging the action, just engaging the taste buds. The other person is engaging the mind and the heart. Isn't that more beautiful? The answer is yes. But there's another model. Don't let that model detract from the fact that there's another model, another way of looking at it, that in a way, the person who does it because they enjoy it and they appreciate it, in a way, they're missing the idea of do it because God wants you to do it. It's not about you, it's about the other person.
And the order of the kings proves that. First Joseph.
Yeah. My point is, to highlight what I'm trying to say is you're not necessarily experiencing both models at the same moment, but I'm saying both models in your life, you're going to have both models. Don't don't allow that the celebrating of one of the model to detract from the other model. They're both true. They're both true. There's a beauty in the guy who has got his mind and his heart engaged in the action. And there's a beauty in the person who says, I don't want to be here. I'd rather be here. I'm here because my mother called me and told me to come to the Seder, so I'm here. Which one's more beautiful? There's two models, both are true. Which one is more true? Don't tell anyone I told you. The Judah model is more true. The action model is more true. And that's radical, and that's especially Chabad theology, especially the Rebbe's theology. But that's already, we have to elaborate upon that to get into
I
that.
will certainly wait for the day where Menachem Feldman on Passover comes by, has a piece of matzah and leaves.
Yeah, it happens. You're not feeling
I
well
don't think
here.
so. I
No, it
don't.
happened one year. I fainted one year. I drank 2 cups of wine on an empty stomach and I fainted. And you know what? I came and I ate the matzah and I went to sleep. And you know what? That did what God wants.
But that was the exception, not the rule. Anyway, I won't argue more. I mean, I
Ask
think
my wife.
ultimately
Ask
we
my
all
wife.
choose.
Ask my wife when she's happier. When I do something because we enjoy it, or I do something because she enjoys it. Ask her.
You
Yeah,
are,
ask her.
Bob, he's right.
Absolutely. Case rested.
Okay, go ahead, Karina, please.
Well, no, I understand like what you are saying, but I mean, I would try to put it into words because I think it's too complex. But the thing is, this idea about, well, the hierarchy that you have, like, it makes sense for me, like the one that is, intellectual, emotions, and action.
Yeah.
I understand the idea to prioritize the action because also the idea, well, Chabad is like to make the word more spiritual as well.
Right.
But I think when you said like what is more important, this is all said and stated by scholars and people that understand the other hierarchy, right? So in some way, don't take it like wrong, but the thing is like, it's like saying, okay, but we want everybody or all the Jewish people to commit and to do the mitzvot. So
Right.
if we are going to expect them to understand everything, it's going to take like a lot of, effort and time and everything. So it's like the word, this sentence, like Naaseh V'nishma.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, do it. It's the most important thing to do the action, to do the mitzvah.
You think, I'm going to push back. You think that Chabad, we're just in the marketing, and we want to include all the Jews. So we find the lowest common denominator, which is action, and we say, just do the mitzvah, because we want to include everybody. And that's what you say. And I'm going to push back and say that the amount of intellectual effort that was put in 7 generations of Chabad theology, especially in the 7th generation, the amount of intellectual firepower that was put in to actually negate that point and say no, that in some sense, the physical and the action is more important than the spiritual. It's not a mistake. It's not a marketing ploy. It's that too. It happens also to be able to include a lot of people. But the theology that was invested in here is tremendous, especially by the Rebbe. And we could talk about this at great length. You could buy the new book that they published a new book about the Rebbe's theology. I didn't read the book, but I'm absolutely sure that this 20% of the book is on the superiority of action. So it's not just that it's a practical tool to engage the masses. It happens to be that as well, but it's not that. I'm going to insist and say no. But the theological perspective is, and it's not only Chabad. Chabad doesn't create anything new. It's all in the Torah, in the Torah as well. Look at the ethics of the fathers. There's this paradox. What's more important, heaven or earth? So it says 1 hour. It says all the pleasures of this world is not as enjoyable as 1 hour of pleasure in the world to come. And all the pleasure of the world to come is not as powerful as 1 hour of doing mitzvot in this world. So which one is it? What's more important? So we're doing this paradox. On one hand, the spiritual is greater than the physical. On the other hand, the physical is where the pun intended is where the action happens, where the drama happens. So the short answer is you're right that it has a practical benefit of including many people. And you also said earlier another theological point, which is also what many people think is the ultimate point. It's one of the points, it's not the ultimate point, that Judaism emphasizes action because we want to fix the world. True. All of this is true. I'm not disagreeing. But I'm saying when the Kabbalah and Hasidism, and certainly Chabad Hasidism, and certainly the seventh generation of Chabad Hasidism, insists that the only way to get to the essence of God is not through study, not through emotion, but through action. And they put in a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of paper to argue this point.
No, I understand that. And I also understand because it's very important not to stay in the intellectual exercise or meditation and to put it into the action and the word because I understand that.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I'm talking about my experience, for example.
Yeah.
When I started to understand and study with you, with Mariachi and everything, the let's say like the motivation, like the willing to do some mitzvot, it changed a lot, right? It changed.
So Karina, you're saying Yosef comes before Judah.
Not
for many people, Joseph can come before Judah. I'm not disagreeing about that. We have no disagreement, right? We're saying the Chabad model is that for some people, Judah comes before Joseph. Sometimes you say, do a mitzvah, and then you'll feel good once you do it, and that will get you to come to study Torah. So there's different paths. Some people are Judah, some people are Joseph. There's different paths. But we're saying there's two models. But what's interesting is that, because Bob always, I'm for the fun of it, I'm going to quote his critique, even though I'm not sure. In other words, critique is fine, but I'm just saying I think Bob's challenge to me always, you can't have it both ways, and I insist that we could. But what's interesting over here is we are taking a side. We're saying ultimately we have to take a side, and while both models are true, the Judah model is more true, and that's why the Messianic era is all about action, all about Judah. When Mashiach comes, we'll see the superiority of the physical over the spiritual. So we're saying both models are true, but we're not shying away. We're not just, we want to make everybody happy. So we're saying, oh, both models are good, everybody's happy. No, we're taking a stand. We're saying there's two models. One is first, one is second. Each has space. Each deserves its respect. There are certain things that you're only going to get in the Joseph model. If you live your whole life as Judah, you don't have you have a difficult life. By the way, as Judah did have a difficult life, at least the stories that we hear about him. He's not in Yiddish they say licking honey. He's not licking honey, okay? But if you want to ultimately, the moment of truth, the drama happens in the action, because that's where the theology of it is that the spirituality doesn't capture the essence of God. We think spirituality is closer to God than physical, because God is transcendent and spiritual is transcendent. But the theology is that the essence of God transcends both physical and spiritual. So he's beyond both. And ultimately, he's more expressed in the physical, because the spiritual is actually a distraction. Because if you think you understand them, you don't understand. So, right? So again, but going beyond, that's already beyond that's going to take time. But again, what we need for today is you have to have Judah, you have to have Joseph in your relationship with God, in your relationship with your other people in your life. Both are a model, both are true. There is hierarchy. On the other hand, the lowest, the commitment, the action, where you don't feel like self-actualization. I don't want to be here. I'm here. I'm taking my kid to the sandbox. I don't want to be here, but I'm going to be here anyway. In some ways, that's not the greatest parenting moment. In some ways, it is the greatest parenting moment.
Is it safe to say that until Mashiach comes, it's kind of a cycle, with the goal being physical?
I think so, but again, the danger is if you need the spiritual to appreciate the material.
Right. So
you need Joseph. Even here, you need Joseph to appreciate Judah. Right? That's why Joseph has to come first. So you say, I'm a spiritual guy. I'm gonna sit and engage in materialism all day. Okay, you missed the point. You're gonna get drowned. You have to be a spiritual person. Then you appreciate what it means to do an action in the physical world. But by the way, if you don't appreciate it, it's also good, because you have the Judah model. And ultimately, the fact that you appreciate it is not the point.
We do appreciate the class, because we are.
Thank you. So we have both models, and both work, and both are good. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and thank you, Benjamin. So nice to meet you on Zoom. I hope I'll meet you in person at some point. Have a wonderful day, wonderful Shabbos. Thank you.
Chazak u'baruch. Shabbat shalom.
Thank you.
Shabbat shalom.